for the glory of old state, for her founder strong and great, for the future that we wait. Raise the song, raise the song.
Where else would you rather be? I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association. Welcome to the People of Penn State. Each week on the podcast, you can expect to hear the voices of Penn Staters talking about what they're passionate about, and you can expect to feel the pride and the power of the Penn State Network. The People of Penn State podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Go ahead and subscribe and give us a rating. Ratings and reviews help others find these great stories, and we have another one to pass on to you today. Today, I am joined by Sebastian Africano. Sebastian, International Business Marketing, class of 1999, has spent the past 23 years working on making the world more hospitable for those at the bottoms of the economic pyramid. He's worked on the front lines of economic development, climate resilience. He's worked in 14 countries with several indigenous nations since graduating from Penn State. Most of that time, he's done that with the Colorado-based impact organization, Trees, Water, and People. You can get more information about them on their website at treeswaterpeople.org. All one word, treeswaterpeople.org. He met his amazing wife, Claudia, while living in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, 16 years ago. And together they are raising two young global citizens and hopefully future Penn Staters in Fort Collins, Colorado. Please welcome into the podcast, Sebastian Africano. Sebastian, how are you?
I'm doing great, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining the People of Penn State. Let's start right at the very beginning. How did you become a Penn Stater?
Well, it's actually a pretty short story. I grew up in Maryland in the DC area, and when I had one of my best friends in high school, his older brother was at Penn State, and so we'd go up to visit him during high school. And you know what that's like if you're a high school student, you go to Happy Valley for the first time and see a football game and get to participate in the culture. It's an overwhelming experience, and I thought it was a pretty cool place to be. And so I applied and got in, and yeah, that's the rest is history. It was all pretty foreign to me. I hadn't really spent much time in Pennsylvania, but it was only 3.5 hours away from home, and seemed like a good choice.
A weekend in Happy Valley is all it takes to fall in love with this place. So not surprised.
I tell you, my 10-year-old son, I took him. I hadn't been back for about 20 years to State College at all. And I went back this past summer and took my 10-year-old son, and he's already declared. all it took was one weekend and a visit to the creamery, and he's hooked.
That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things you were interested in and involved in while you were a student at Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, I was your average knucklehead. I was at the Pi Kappa Alpha fraternity at Penn State, College of Business. I did study abroad. That was a really cool opportunity. Did a lot of mountain biking in the area, outdoor stuff. It's, Happy Valley is a great place, and I did a lot of traveling around Pennsylvania and around the region, just getting to know new places where my friends were from. It was cool to have friends from. That's just kind of the college experience. You meet people from different places, different backgrounds, different cultures, get to know about them, go visit their hometowns. So yeah, I mean, a lot of just great college experiences.
Yeah, you were here at a good time for Penn State football too, with LeVar Arrington and Courtney Brown and those guys doing what they were doing on the gridiron. So weekends in Happy Valley were a lot of fun when you were on campus.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting, and the football culture was awesome, and definitely helped. Yeah.
This is the People of Penn State podcast. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined by Sebastian Africano. He's the executive director of Trees, Water, and People, an impact organization based in Fort Collins, Colorado. So we were talking off air a little bit. First 5 years after school, did a little bit of traveling and working on the West Coast before starting with Trees, Water, People as an intern, and now have worked your way up to be the executive director. Share a little bit about the mission and the work that you do with Trees, Water, People.
Gladly, yeah. So Trees, Water, and People really spoke to me as an organization because they marry everything having to do with natural resource management, economic development, and strong livelihoods, and just general social and environmental well-being. And so there was a lot to dig into. They look at environmental problems as social problems and realize that people's needs have to be met before they can really think about how they exist within their environment and with their natural resources. So we work with rural communities, often indigenous, often very poor to extremely poor in Central America, so Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and also on tribal lands here in the US and the West. And a lot of these issues are the same in these places, people that have been relegated from traditional homelands that spanned entire nations down into small concentrated pockets of where they're struggling to survive. And we work with these communities in different ways. We work with the youth, trying to get just subsistence projects off the ground or entrepreneurial projects off the ground. We work with small businesses and manufacturers to help them engage in their economy and produce something on their own. We work with farmer organizations. We work with women's organizations. We work with national parks. We work with a whole host of different, and with tribes as well. And with tribes, we do a lot of mitigation of relationships having to do with their traditional tribal lands, how they manage their forests, their watersheds, and where they butt up against, federal, the National Forest Service, or other land managers, the Bureau of Land Management, et cetera, and try to broker those relationships to a productive end that involve Native people, Native voices, Native communities, and people that are typically have been pushed out of these conversations and are on the losing end of the power dynamic. And so we try to even that out a little bit and create opportunities for folks that haven't had much.
Yeah, I think of kind of the complicated problems that you're trying to solve, with also kind of a layer of complicated geopolitical contexts in some of these countries that you're working in. And I think of the work that you're doing with indigenous sovereign people, and yet they are encompassed and surrounded in so many cases by larger countries that they exist in, with a variety of different policies that have an impact on way of life. What is some of the advocacy that you do on behalf of indigenous sovereign people? What does that look like?
A lot of it is fundraising and project planning. We do a lot of, first it's relationship building, right? And building trust, starting small, thinking, understanding priorities. And we're really just, we're there to listen, we're there to absorb, we're there to learn, and we're not there to represent them per se, but really try to broker conversations between tribes, their interests, and the barriers that prevent them from achieving those priorities and interests. So that takes different shapes in different places, depending on the historical context of the indigenous community that we're working in. Some are more urban, some are more rural, some are on reservations, some are on the traditional homelands, some are formerly nomadic, some are agrarian. So the problems and solutions take different forms, and so the first step is really just listening, building relationships, establishing trust, showing up, right, and just being consistent in how we engage, because there's a lot to learn, and we don't presume to know anything. We try to work with as many indigenous people as possible. Our program director is from one of the communities we work in. We hire a lot of contractors directly from the communities we work with, and that helps us understand and also communicate between ourselves as an independent nonprofit organization, the tribe, and any other actors that might be involved in that particular situation. So a lot of it is land use, resources, fire prevention, fire recovery, water and water availability, energy. A lot of these places are remote. Energy costs a lot. People spend a lot more than the average U.S. citizen on basic needs, and there's a lot less income to go around. There's a lot less of an economic base. And so we look at all of those problems as kind of a systemic issue and really try to work on several parts at once, but at the community's pace and at their priority level, and then within our expertise as well. So it's difficult to describe what we do in a concise way because it varies a lot, whether we're working with a remote rural community in Honduras or a community right down the road in South Dakota or New Mexico or in Colorado.
Right.
All have similar challenges, but all have very particular circumstances that really define how you approach those challenges.
How does an engagement come about? Like, how do you decide we're going to help this community in Honduras or this community in the Colorado River Valley? How do people reach out to your organization and engage you in this work?
That's a great question. And again, not a very straightforward answer. It happens in a lot of different ways. We've been around for 24, almost 25 years. So we have broad networks. We have a good reputation. We go to conferences. We engage with other actors working in these spaces. And we, sometimes it's an introduction that leads to a conversation, that leads to a pilot project that grows from there. In Central America, we work with local nonprofit organizations. So we don't have like a Trees, Water, and People Honduras or anything. We try and find organizations already working in the area, plugged into those communities, working on things that are consistent with our mission. And we start the same way, have an introductory conversation, say, is there something here? Is there a symbiosis, right? Are we a complementary type of relationship, or are we going to step on each other's toes? Is there funding that would support this type of work? So a lot of elements come together, and we typically aren't the ones making those final decisions. Our partners will make the decisions. They have the relationships, they know the issues, they know the challenges, they have the communication lines open, and we listen to them and figure out how to get involved strategically. From a funding perspective, how do we fund this work? How do we get donors excited about this work and engaged and make it relevant to our donor community? I mean, we have donors in all 50 states. We work with corporations. We work with private foundations. We work with individuals. We work with donor advised funds, family foundations, et cetera. And so, how do we make them part of that picture or story? How is it relevant to them? And how does it put the community's priorities first? And how do we make all that clear and click together?
As I sit here and I think about the work that you're doing and the impact that you're having, I think about large global issues like access to safe, healthy, and clean water. I think of deforestation and the impact that has on carbon dioxide and people that might live outside of the area but are affected by what's going on in one country has an impact in another country. And I think, if I were to describe what you're doing is you're trying to work and solve some of those problems one community at a time. Is that a fair way to maybe characterize it? And then, my follow-up question would be, how do you kind of attack global issues that everyone in the world should be thinking about at the micro level?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I really appreciate that. We do look for the multipliers, right? Some of our work is very person to person. It's community to community. Communities dealing with fallout from migration or fallout from violence, community violence, and narco trafficking, corrupt politicians, and everything that the regions that we work in have to deal with. And so, some of that work is very intentional, very small scale, and very kind of tailored to the individual region or community that we're working with, more long-term, long horizon. And then there's others. I mean, we do have some semi-commercial work. I came into this space through the clean cooking. So half of the world's population cooks with firewood still, right? It's a 10,000-year-old habit. And people will cook every single meal over an open fire, usually, creating health challenges, making inefficient use of forest resources, and a host of other issues, right? And so we, over the past 24 years, have kind of become specialists in both designing, manufacturing, and deploying clean cooking solutions. So those clean cooking is about designing a cooking system, so a stove, that will cook the people's food the way they like it cooked, with the fuel that they have available, with the pots they have available, and the time that they expect it to be done. But at the same time, eliminating the smoke from the household, reducing firewood consumption by half, creating jobs for builders, like specialized labor that can understand the specs and install these correctly, and then measuring the impact, so measuring the carbon emissions reductions, et cetera. And that's something that can be more rapidly scaled. So there we deal with entire countries at a time, many different regions, many different manufacturers, many different builders. And so we have dozens and dozens of people working on this in several communities at a time. And it's less of a slow going process and very tailored process, and more of kind of a I wouldn't say one size fits all solution, but a more scalable solution where we've studied the problem, we understand what works, and we can deploy something at a more effective scale that helps more people at the same time. And so that's kind of, we have a broad range, some projects that are more like that and easy to multiply, and others that are more very locally focused and depend on local actors, local conditions and circumstances, history and historical relations, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the migration piece of the work that you do and the impact of migration on Central and South America. I think back to policies that we had pre-1960s in the United States that allowed migratory migration and migrant worker populations to freely enter and exit the country, which provided for not only significant economic impact on Central and South America, but also was, I guess, a time where there was less tension at the borders that people were crossing. And then in the 60s, and I don't want to get into politics, but the politics of fear and of what some of those populations may or may not have been involved in has significantly had an impact on the economics of Central and South America. It's had an impact on the economics here and what we're paying under the guise of border security and things that we as a country choose to spend money on. How has that had an impact on the work that you do?
Oh, it impacts us every day. If we trace it historically back, it can go back as far as the 50s. But most acutely, I think the Central American Civil Wars in the late 70s, early 80s, which the U.S. was very involved in. Everything involved with the Cold War and just kind of the battling the scourge of communism. Central America was a proxy war between Russia and the U.S. if we want to simplify it. But that has repercussions all the way through today. The massacres that occurred, the training of the militaries, the Contra scandal and the Iran-Contra scandal, funding of weapons for the start of the cocaine trafficking trade. All of that kind of ripples through the decades and creates the conditions that we see today: the gangs, the narco traffickers. So people migrate for three kind of large-scale reasons, I'd say. One is security, so violence, corruption, and just being able to live in a society that respects law, that respects the rule of law, and that just doesn't really exist in Central America these days, both at the government level, military level, police level, societal level, and narco trafficking and gangs have a lot to do with it. And that was born of that period in the 80s. So security is one. The other is economic. So not enough opportunity. The working age population is ballooning. There's not a whole lot of economic activity that's sustained and meaningful and that provides a meaningful, just wage for people to exist with the current cost of living. There's no economic base. A lot of the markets are informal. So people are scraping by. A lot of the economies are agrarian, so based on agriculture and getting really low values for the crops they produce. Coffee is one of the big levers in that world. So economics, not enough jobs for too many people, and then the third would be environmental. So climate risks and climate disasters. For instance, in 2020. We had 2 Class 5 hurricanes hit the north coast of Nicaragua and Honduras, 15 miles apart, within 2 weeks, 10 days of each other, or 2 weeks of each other. And that's kind of way out of the bounds of normal hurricane season. And so that sets back decades of any progress, really drives migration in a way that we haven't seen before, because people are literally losing their homes, they're losing their agricultural, their fields, they're losing their food supply, they're losing their places of business or where they did work. Everything collapses with one climate disaster that can happen over the course of a day. Takes out roads, bridges. It just sets the country back, and they don't have the economic base. Like I said, they don't have a tax base to really bounce back quickly. So it just compounds and compounds and compounds. And so over the decades, those 3 kind of macro factors, the economy, security, and the environment, have really ground down Central America, and made it really difficult to live down there. I mean, I lived down there for 4 years in the capital of Honduras, and it opens your eyes a little bit when you're coming from North America and you're thrust into that society and see how people hustle to survive. Like, people don't want to leave. Like, that's not their first choice. It's really their last choice. And, you see families separated because the men will leave to look for work to send money back to their families. And like you said, there used to be mechanisms that regulated this and governed it. I think there's a lot of challenges to point to, but this year migration is at record levels, and they're starting to see nationalities that they've never even seen, just using Central America and Mexico as a land bridge. So it's not only Central American, it's really kind of the global South and kind of the tropics that are experiencing these pressures all the way around the world, are looking for a way out of their situation.
Guatemala, Venezuela, Bolivia, right? All areas that you traditionally see.
Yeah, West Africa, Haiti. I mean, like, you're seeing, you're seeing nationalities that, even from South America, you're seeing people from the South Cone making it over the Darien Gap in Panama, which doesn't have any roads, but there's well-worn paths now where people are crossing, and then from there it's just a hop, skip, and a jump, say, to the U.S. So, I think a lot of our attention on the migration issue in the U.S. Starts at the border, right? It didn't start there, and so we try to bring attention to the root causes, the historical conditions that kind of brought this about, how we contributed to it. Just as a country, and through politics and war and manipulation and just geopolitics. And then we try to take a proactive approach to how do we fix this? We're not going to fix it by changing our policies at the border, becoming more draconian, locking people up, separating families, et cetera. Like, that's all reactive, and it's treating the symptom. And so our approach is to really think about how do we create, look at those 3 kind of buckets and say, well, we can't do much about the security, except stay out of the way. But on the environmental front, we can improve, environmental conditions, watershed conditions, get more trees in the ground, start restoring places that produce water, how to store water, how to get agricultural outputs up, etc. We can work on the economic part and try to create more jobs, and meaningful jobs, consequential jobs that are contributing to the other 2 parts, and do our little bit, right? Because it's, at the end of the day, drops of water in the ocean, but we're helping tens of thousands of people a year, and that ripples through society, and hopefully allows families to stay together, allows them to make the choice to try another year. But it's tough, man. It's a big tide we're working against, and we feel it every single day, right? We have people down there that are friends, that are almost family, and that are long-term partners, that are working for their country and for their people, and don't want to see it go this way. Right. but the tide is really strong, as you well know.
So I think about my work on a day-to-day basis, right, and trying to get support for Penn State. I know the cause that we are raising money for and raising support for, and we go out and we ask Penn Staters for their support. Who is the target audience for supporting an organization like Trees, Water, People?
That's a great question. I mean, we have such a broad donor base that it really varies depending on the issue. And I think being so versatile and multifaceted, it helps us. It makes it difficult to encapsulate what we do into a small, very tidy statement, but it gives different people different ways to engage. Some people really are attracted to the economic development front. We work with people who are lifelong entrepreneurs who love supporting and seeing other entrepreneurs succeed and want to see how it's done in different environments. And so we started a company a couple of years ago called TWP Tours because we were getting such high demand for people to want to see our work on the ground. And we've taken, everything everywhere from elementary and middle school students to university students and researchers to business people to, large corporations or foundations down to see our work, and they all have different interests. One way we're talking about it right now is the impact we create kind of falls into 6 different buckets on the ground. We work on Indigenous sovereignty issues. So there's folks that are really engaged with Indigenous sovereignty, both here in the U.S. and or Central America, and really kind of making sure that there's a space carved out for the original inhabitants of these lands, that their needs are being prioritized, that their economic development is being taken into account, that their territorial sovereignty is being taken into account, et cetera. So we have groups that fund that work. Gender equity work is another big bucket. We work a lot on gender-based violence and gender issues, both on tribal lands and down in Central America. Livelihoods, so economic development, people will, that's a really easy one to get behind. When one of the big drivers of migration is that there's not enough jobs, not enough income, we look at different ways to get at how do we create stronger livelihoods and people in things and areas that people are already engaged with. So agriculture, manufacturing, and simple stuff like stove building, masonry. But another target audience would latch onto that. So businesses, et cetera, really like that message. Environmental restoration and climate resilience is kind of another bucket. Self-actualization. So giving people the opportunity to explore, to develop a career. We need professionals in these countries, and a lot of them are leaving. So there's a brain drain happening in these countries, and we want to make sure that young people have options and are able to realize, all the things that all humans want, economic stability. They want to make sure their family is secure, they have food on the table at night, and that they have options. They don't have to just follow in the family's footsteps and just kind of be relegated to poverty generation after generation. And then youth development is another big one. We try to find work that supports youth. And so another target audience would be folks and organizations that like to see youth succeed and create more opportunities for youth. And that gets into, gang culture, giving young people alternatives to joining the gang or to migrating before they're 18 or to finishing school or to going to get that college degree. So, there's different audiences that support the different parts of our work for different reasons. And we try to break it out like that, just kind of in thematic areas. And then we have several projects that will speak to those specific donors.
It's fascinating. This is the People of Penn State. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined by Sebastian Africano. He's the executive director of Trees, Water, and People. It's an impact-based organization in Fort Collins, Colorado. Sebastian, some heavy stuff that we've been talking about. We do like to lighten it up at the end of the People of Penn State podcast and go with our lightning round. I'm just going to throw a couple quick hitter questions at you. You tell me the first thing that comes to mind.
All right.
Your favorite class at Penn State?
Ooh. I'll tell you the one that kind of set me on a new track. There was a marketing class. Andrew Bergstein, I think it was the professor's name. And it was unstructured business plan writing. All my writing classes at Penn State were really influential. I had great writing teachers and just people that encouraged us to think outside the box, get our thoughts on paper, formulate the thoughts, and give us really harsh feedback, and not limit ourselves in terms of where our imagination could take us. So yeah, there was a marketing class that did that for me, and a business writing class that did that for me.
How about if you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'll have to come back to that one. There's so many choices running through my head right now. I'm thinking, across continents. I'm thinking across history. Thinking, what type of discussion we'd like to have and what type of food. But I'll have to think about that one and get back to you.
All right. How about your most unusual "we are" moment? Maybe an unexpected place where someone yelled "we are" and caught you off guard, or you saw someone wearing Penn State and yelled out "we are." What's your "we are" moment?
Well, the conversation. I mean, I was in the back of a Land Rover in rural Uganda, and when I discovered that the person riding in the back with me also went to Penn State, and that was a pretty unique "we are" moment for sure.
That's amazing. How about your favorite Penn State sport?
Wow. Well, football is, obviously rises to the top. There's nothing like being in Beaver Stadium. I can't wait to take my son to his first game, just for the sheer size of it and how overwhelming it is. So I'll stick with that. And
your favorite flavor of creamery ice cream?
I knew that one was coming. And we went to the creamery this past summer for my first time in 20 years, and we tried probably every flavor that they had. So I can't say. I'd have to ask my son what his favorite was.
All right. Well, hey, Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us on the People of Penn State. Our alma mater says, "May our lives swell thy fame," and certainly the work that you're doing around the world is swelling thy fame of dear old state. And for that, we're truly grateful. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. It's been great.
I want to thank our producer, Vincent Longaro, for all of his work. I want to thank our guest relations coordinator, Mara Ryan, for lining up these fantastic guests that we have week after week. If you like this episode, I hope that you'll subscribe to the People of Penn State podcast in your favorite podcast app of choice. And while you're there, go ahead and give us a rating and drop us a review. Help us spread the word and share these wonderful stories about fellow Penn Staters. And if you do, on social media, tag us at Penn State alums. If you're a member of the Alumni Association, thank you so much for your support. If you're not a member, what are you waiting for? Go to our website at alumni.psu.edu, and you too can become a member of the world's largest alumni association. Thank you for listening and all you do for Penn State, for the glory, and for the future. We are.
No act of ours brings shame to one heart that loves thy name. May our lives but swell thy fame. Dear old state, dear old state.